31 years before the introduction of A1 steak sauce to the 44 United States of America, a head-on train collision in Pike County, Pennsylvania resulted in the death of 51 Confederate prisoners and 17 Union guards while transporting prisoners from Point Lookout, Maryland to Elmira, New York. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Deep Dive. I'm your host, Detective Trogdor. And before we get started in the video, if you could just give me a like and subscribe down below, that'd be much appreciated to help build this channel. We are going to be discussing today a little bit of Civil War history that takes place in Pennsylvania that is not Gettysburg. Sorry for the delay in the release of the video. I want to say that I was busy the whole time, but I just kind of kept putting it to the back burner. And then Sunday, the day I normally do all the editing, because I normally record on Saturdays, I got distracted by moving the chickens up north, and then I got distracted by a concert. Anyway, so today we're going to be talking about the Great Shohola train wreck. The year was 1964. The Civil War was in its last year of conflict. A year prior to the collision, the Battle of Gettysburg was waging down in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania from July 1st to 3rd, where the Union lost 23,049 soldiers and the Confederacy lost an estimated 23,000 to 28,000 soldiers. At the Battle of Cold Harbor, the prisoners of war were being transported north to Point Lookout, Maryland, where they would inevitably be transferred all the way up to Camp Rathburn, a newly constructed prison in Elmira, New York. If that would have stuck, that would have actually been exactly where it needed to be. On July 15, 1964, locomotive engine number 171 departed on its journey north, pulling 17 passenger and freight cars along the Erie Railroad, with a passenger load of 833 Confederate prisoners and 128 Union guards, comprised of members of the U.S. Veteran Reserve Corps under command of Captain Morris L. Church. The wood-burning locomotive was traveling along at an average speed of around 20 miles per hour and was chasing behind a regularly scheduled train that was heading north. So now this engine was classified as an extra, which means that the regularly scheduled train is on its route, and then this one just kind of follows in tow, so they don't necessarily have to schedule themselves through junctions and transfers and whatnot. Scheduled train West 23 signaled to engine 171 with using warning flags, giving them the right of way. So they were letting them going to go ahead of them. However, they were delayed leaving Jersey City, New Jersey. Super unfortunate for everyone involved in that, due to complications with prisoners getting away, which I don't understand how you lose track of prisoners when you're stopped, but hey, Civil War, different times. Damn it! This delay put the train 4 hours behind schedule at their arrival at Point Jervis, New York. There, try to fall out now. The next leg of the trip had a train tracing around the western edge of the Delaware River, where it would be experiencing a lot of sharp and blind turns, steep cliff drop-offs, and it all went through an isolated Shohola township of Pike County, Pennsylvania. West 23 had steamed well ahead of engine 171 and had crossed Hawley Branch, a newly constructed junction at Lackawaxen. Close enough! Sponsor me. Where West 23 was signaled to the junction station, where telegraph operator Douglas Duff Kent that there was an extra train in tow using flags out the side, which would prompt the telegraph operator to hold all traffic from going down that line of tracks. At 2:30 p.m., Erie engine number 237, loaded with 50 cars of coal, waited at the junction, having just been loaded at the Pennsylvania Coal Company's Gravity Depot in Hawley, Pennsylvania. John Martin was the caboose rider of engine 237, and he hopped out of the caboose and went over to talk to Kent in the Lackawaxen station to ask him if they were all clear to proceed. Despite having been notified that West 23 had an extra train in tow with them, old Duffy Boy just gave him the go-ahead, so Martin then went up to engineer Samuel Hoyt and gave him the go-ahead. We're good to go on the tracks, and let's get steaming along. Allegedly, Duff had been partying the night before and was still feeling the effects of either was still drunk or probably hungover, maybe both, who knows, from the night prior, which severely impacted his ability to, remember things and make sound judgment calls. Later investigation after the fact concluded that he was an alcoholic. What a loser. Hey, it's me, post-production. I forgot to put this in, my research document, but I remembered later. So, old Duffy Boy was... We can all understand from the entire situation, he was held responsible for this entire thing. An official jury was called to determine who was at fault for this entire thing, and they all determined that Kent, the signalman, old Duffy Boy, was the one who was responsible for the entire accident. However, Kent had left at 9 a.m. the following morning on the 16th after his shift was over and was never heard from again. So though he was deemed one responsible, they could never actually try him or punish him for his actions. But the thing I think is hysterical about it is this guy was solely responsible for this massive train wreck while he was on watch. Like it was his fault that these two trains collided. But instead of just fleeing the scene while everyone's distracted with a train wreck, he stayed his watch the rest of the night until 9 a.m. in the morning and then fled, and he just ran for the hills. So he knew he was going to get in trouble, but he still stayed for the rest of his watch because that's what good watchstanders do. Now back to everything that was recorded yesterday. At this point, engine 237 is now steam along, heading east with all 50 cars of coal in tow. Meanwhile, engine 171, with its 17 passenger cars, is now heading west along the rail. At 2:45 p.m., engine 171 passed Shohola, with putting on 4 miles between the two trains. At King and Fuller's Cut, a section of track with a blind curve with only about 50 feet of forward visibility, the two behemoths collided, shaking the riverbank and the earth surrounding them, startling farmers in their fields and alerting everyone nearby that something had just happened. Unlike a car crash, where the two vehicles can either crumple, bounce off each other, or dead stop at one point, a train crash is much more brutal. All of that energy has to go somewhere, and whichever is the larger of the two is traditionally one that keeps going, and let me show you some numbers. Okay, so now we're going to make some really rough estimates because for all intents and purposes, I don't have those specific numbers, but using average weight of coal cars, average weight of locomotives from the time, and average weight of freight cars, we can do some pretty rough math and get at least in the ballpark idea of what these accidents are going to be like. So, assuming that both trains they never applied the brakes, because like we said, they had a 50 feet of reaction time, and for a train that is nowhere near enough, they usually need almost a mile, if not more. We're going to negate air resistance because it's fucking pointless. And we're going to treat this as a frictionless environment because trains, in a sense, on the tracks, they are developed. The way that they are sitting is that pretty much only a pinpoint of that wheel is touching the rail at any time, so it's effectively frictionless. We'll also calculate this for the force of impact upon moment of collision. So we're going to see how much force the coal train was generating, and we see the amount of force that the passenger train was generating, and then you pretty much put them both at the same point at the same time, and you can get a general idea of how much energy was being exerted. By no means should this be taken as a lesson whatsoever. This is all just for facts and figures to help you grasp the concept of a train crash. I'm not a physics teacher. I did terrible in high school, and the best thing I can do right now is do some basic algebra using internet equations that I found, and we're going to go from there. So to calculate the mass of engine 237, which is the coal car, we're going to take some numbers into the equation. So we're going to assume that the weight of the locomotive itself is about 25.15 US tons, and then we're also going to assume that the tender car, so the car that follows behind the locomotive directly that provides fuel for it, weighs around 143 tons, and that's just using a basic coal car that's fully loaded because, like I said, don't have specific numbers, but we're going to get at least in the ballpark. So the engine itself, right off the rip, is going to be about 168 US tons. Engine 237 was also pulling 50 coal cars itself. So we're going to take that 143 tons that we reuse for the tender car, multiply it by 50, and add that to the 168 that we got from the locomotive and the tender car itself. So we'll get a grand total of the weight for the coal train itself at 7,318 U.S. tons. We're going to convert that U.S. measurement into metric. So 7,318 U.S. tons is the equivalent of 6,638.8 metric tons. And we're converting to metric because in physics it's a lot easier to have everything in standard formula, and we're just going to use metric the whole time because it's a lot easier. Now, we need to calculate the weight of engine 171. This one's a little easier, so we're going to do the same assumption with the locomotive weight and the tender car. So that's going to be, in total, 168 U.S. tons. Then we're going to add 17 passenger cars, and the average weight of a passenger car at the time was around 63 tons. So, yet again, I don't feel like doing the multiplication, but I did the math already. And so we're going to get, in total, with the locomotive, tender car, and all the passenger cars, it's going to be 1,239 U.S. tons, which converts to 1,124 metric tons. Now, we are going to assume that both trains were going at the same speed because they both, in different articles, were saying they were going about 25 miles per hour each. So, we're going to convert 25 miles per hour to meters per second. So 25 miles per hour to meters per second is 11.2 meters per second. For force equation, it's force equals mass times acceleration. So we have the mass, and now we have the speed, but we need to determine the acceleration at time of impact. And because acceleration is different than speed itself, we need to figure out exactly what that change in energy was. So we're going to assume that it went to a complete dead stop upon collision, because that's when the impact happened, even though I understand that the coal train, weighing almost six times more than the passenger train, is going to have continued through it. But we're just rough calculations. 0 meters per second minus 11.2 meters per second, and the average car crash time that I found for time it took to come to a complete stop was 0.5 seconds. So we're going to do 0 minus 11.2 divided by 0.05, which is going to be equal to 224 meters per second squared. And it's negative, but in acceleration, there's no negative acceleration. There's just because velocity is all vector based, and yeah, they're not really going backwards. They're going forward just at a negative rate. Regardless, 224 meters per second squared. So now we're going to plug all this information into our equation of force equals mass times acceleration. For engine 237, the coal train, force is equal to 6,638.8 tons, which when you convert to kilograms, because we have to have common units, 6,638,800 kilograms times 224 meters per second squared. My handwriting is awful today. But when converted into, when we multiply these together and it converts to newtons, the force of the coal train is 1,487,086,272 newton. Now we're going to calculate the force of engine 171, which was our passenger train. So yet again, force equals mass times acceleration. Therefore, the mass is 1,124 metric tons. Converted to kilograms is 1,124,000. That's it. Times 224 is going to get us a net unit of 251,776,000 newton. So now I'm going to put them side by side just so you can have a real grasp of what the numbers are. 1,487,086,272 newtons. That was 237. 171 is 251,776,000 newtons. That's a 7, I promise. It's not a 2. So I gave you these numbers. They're in the millions and billions, and I told you I'm going to give you a frame of reference. For an average car crash of going about 50 miles per hour, the average energy expended during a car crash is 490,000 newtons in a 50 mile per hour car crash. So we're talking 2 trains. One of them, its stopping power is in the billions, and the other one is in the 100 millions. There's going to be some carnage. Engineer Hyatt of engine 237 saw the collision about to happen, and he made the conscious decision at that point to jump clear of the locomotive to spare his own life. Conductor John Martin, the brakeman, last name Boyden, and fireman Philo Predis were unable, however, to escape from the crash and were crushed by the cordwood as well as steel shrapnel that shot out from the collision itself. Engineer William Ingram and fireman Daniel Tuttle of engine 171 were not so lucky as well. Upon collision, the pressurized steam inside of a locomotive, because if you don't know how locomotives work, watch another video. The steam pipes burst, which instantly killed Tuttle. Ingram, on the other hand, was not blessed with a quick death. A load of cordwood from the tender car was jettisoned forward in the cabin of the locomotive and pinned Ingram against the boiler head, where he was scalded to death and with a combination of searing temperature of the metal as well as the leaking steam pipes all around. With his dying breath, he urged people, all his rescuers, to stay away from him because there was still a risk of the boiler exploding and claiming more lives because he knew that his was already over at that point. The first passenger car following the tender car was reduced to splinters upon the impact of the other 16 cars following it, pushing it into the tender car, at which point the tender car was launched upright and the cordwood fell out of it and crushed the rest of the car beneath it. The greatest loss of life from the prison train was attributed to the first 3 cars itself because of all the momentum from the back pushing forward to the cars with the least amount of resistance for crush capabilities. Passengers that weren't immediately crushed inside a train car were either thrown from the car and died from impact there, thrown inside the car and killed by the crushing force of them hitting a wall. They were impaled upon pieces of wood or pieces of metal that were sitting everywhere. I'd say probably the most gruesome details that I found was that the prison guards that were riding between the cars, some of them were standing up on the top to overlook to make sure if anybody was climbing on top of the train car they could see. Those people were essentially cut in half as the train cars collided together. Because this happened so quickly, no one was really able to react quick enough except for the engineer Hyatt, who jumped out of the other car. The train cars then proceeded to collapse together. The ones in the end didn't necessarily completely crush, but they definitely crashed into the car in front of them. So anybody that was standing and looking over, say from the waist up was above the train, they would just smash between 2 train cars. And there were details of people's entrails and blood just gushing over the sides of these train cars. The remaining injured but capable Union guards in the last few cars of the train were ordered to encircle the train to stop a mass Confederate prison outbreak. That being said, my hat's off to the 5 rebels that actually managed to escape from this train crash and were never captured again. Despite the animosity between the Confederates and the Union soldiers at the time of this crash, with the exception of those 5 Confederates that escaped, they together began to pull the wreckage apart of the train, try to rescue people that were just trapped within but still alive, as well as start collecting the remains of the bodies and start getting them in order so they could start identifying their brothers. In case you were wondering, both of the trains were totaled after this accident. A 76-foot long, 8-foot wide, and 6-foot deep trench was dug right on site because at this point they didn't have anywhere to inter all these dead bodies because it was, 72 bodies. And we're talking in Pennsylvania in June, so it's only going to get hotter. So if they hold these bodies anywhere, especially the Confederate bodies that they would have to send back south, they're going to get stinky. And it's going to become a sanitary issue at that point. So they decided to bury all the bodies on the spot, and at some point, they would come back from later, like after they were done dealing with, some war that was going on or something. A train was brought down the line, and they began to then transport all of the survivors of the accident off to Camp Rathburn just to finish their journey, and this time hopefully there was no more incidents along that line. In 1911, the U.S. government ordered that the bodies from this train crash were to be removed from the side of the Delaware River and then moved to an actual gravesite to, honor their death. However, of the 72 bodies buried at that site, there were only the remains of 63 of them found. And those 63 that they found were just kind of fragments of bodies. They couldn't truly identify one body from the other because they were just buried in effectively a mass grave. Those 9 bodies that they could not account for, they determined were probably washed away by the Delaware River, which is the most upsetting concept of this one, that they just kind of shrugged it off and were like, oh, I guess the Delaware River washed it away, considering they dug it 6 foot deep. Since the bodies couldn't be identified individually, they made another mass grave in Elmira National Cemetery and placed a monument to mark the site of the grave itself, with the names of the Union soldiers that were lost on the northern face of the monument and the name of the rebels on the southern face appropriately. Again, I'd like to thank you for your patience in the release of this video. I'm not going to lie, the next few weeks are probably going to be rocky in terms of when I have time to actually record and then have time to edit. But, this is a passion project at this point. I'm just having fun with it as I go and learning new things about really obscure facts about Pennsylvania, and until I get a good following, it's just going to stay this way. So until the next video, if you have any recommendations, please just leave a comment down below. Please give me a like, please subscribe, hit that bell, do whatever you can to help boost my numbers and my relevancy in search engines and where I'll fall in that. Liquid Death, if you want to sponsor me, that would be much appreciated, because I'm constantly buying your stuff, so you might as well just start giving it to me, and I'll just start talking about it more and give more in-depth discussions about it, not just the fact that I'm holding a can of sparkling water. Yet again, please buy some of your Ubora coffee. I just ordered some tea, and hopefully it comes here soon. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye!